Open up your math notebooks to the table of contents and go ahead and copy down what we're doing today. Expressions and equations vocab. For me, it's page 21 and 20. For you, it might be something different. You can go ahead and pause the video to write that down. If you're ready, you can go ahead and turn to those next pages. And label it expressions and equations vocab. And remember, you can pause the video at any time if I'm going too quickly. This is a page that we're going to write down all of the vocab that we have for this unit. So we're going to be coming back to this page a lot. But we're going to start by dividing it up into 4 sections. The first section will be the word. Second section will be the definition. Third section will be the example. And the fourth section will be the non-example, meaning something that is not true for that word, or not an example of that word. So go ahead and write down these 4 sections that we're going to be filling out for each word that we do. And once you have finished writing down those 4 words, you can go ahead and draw some lines. I'm making my lines go all the way down to the bottom of the page because this entire page will be used for vocab. And then I'm going to make a line going across too. So we end up with kind of this vocabulary chart. All right, once you've got that done, you can go ahead and write down the first word that we need to learn today. The first word is constant. The word constant you might have heard outside of math, but it usually means something that's not changing, something that stays the same. In math, the word constant is something very similar. The definition of constant is a number whose value does not change. I'm going to write that "not" in all capital letters because that's the most important. A constant is a number whose value does not change. It stays the same. So some examples of constants would be the number 13, -7, 1/5, -5.2. All of those are examples of constants. Those values don't change. The number 13 always means 13. The number 1/5 always means 1/5. Those are examples of constants. Some non-examples of constants would be variables or things that are changing, which we're actually going to talk about next. But that would be if you ever see a problem that has like an X or a Y or an A or a B in it. Some sort of letter usually represents something that might change. So that would be an example of something that is not a constant. Those are changing. Whereas these numbers are always going to stay the same. Okay, I'm going to draw a little squiggly line here because we are done with our first vocab word. We've got 3 more to go. The second word is variable, which I mentioned just a moment ago. You might have heard of the word variable before, either in math or in science also. In science, you hear a lot about independent variables or dependent variables. In math, a variable is a quantity that may change. So it's kind of like the opposite of a constant. A constant cannot change. A variable, it's a quantity that may change. And in math, it's represented by a letter. That's why we're using letters in math, to represent quantities that might change. Okay, so some examples of this would kind of be what we wrote down in the non-examples for constant. Would be if you see an x in the problem, a y, an a b, or any other letter. These all represent quantities that may change. That's why we use a letter to represent them. So some non-examples would be just our numbers, kind of like what we wrote down for constant. 13 is not a variable, it can't change. Same with -7, 1/5, -5.2. Those are all constants that have the same value. They will not change. But a variable is a quantity that may change, and it's represented by a letter. Once you've got that written down, you can go ahead and do that squiggly line again. We're going to move on to our third vocab word, which is expression. Third vocab word is expression. You may have heard the word expression before, like if someone makes a facial expression, like a happy face or a sad face. In math, though, the word expression means something different. In math, an expression is a combination of variables, numbers, and operations. Operations would be like adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. Those are our 4 operations. So an expression is a combination of variables, numbers, or constants, and operations that show a mathematical relationship. Okay, so again, that expression is a combination of variables, numbers, and operations that show a mathematical relationship. It doesn't always have to include variables and numbers. Sometimes it might include just variables. Sometimes it might include just numbers, but it does include our operations. So some examples of this would be x plus y times z. This is a combination of variables, those letters, and operations. I used addition and multiplication. Another example of an expression could be 3x plus 2 minus 4y. So that's a combination of variables, x and y, numbers, we've got 2s, 3s, and 4s, and operations. So some examples of things that wouldn't be an expression is if you just had a variable by itself. We don't really consider that an expression. And the same if we just had a number by itself, the number 2. We don't really consider that an expression either. We consider expressions when you combine variables, numbers, and operations together. Not just the variables by themselves and not just the numbers by themselves. All right, we're on to our last vocab word, which is the word coefficient. The word coefficient is a number which multiplies a variable. A number that multiplies a variable. So for example, we could take 5x this 5 right in front is called our coefficient, because this 5, when it's right in front of the variable, actually represents multiplication. So it would be 5 times x. I'm going to write that underneath that. 5 times x. Whenever we have a number just right in front of the variable, it means that we're multiplying them. Mathematicians just got rid of the little x or the dot in between them and just leave it as 5x. So that coefficient is 5, because 5 is what we're multiplying times a variable. So some examples of things that are not coefficients, some non-examples would be if we just had the number 3. In this case, 3 is a number, but it's not being multiplied by a variable. So it's just a constant. Or we could also have y. Y is a variable, but there's no number that's multiplying by it to be our coefficient. The coefficient is going to be the number that multiplies the variable, or the number in front of the variable. And that is all of our vocab words. If you have any extra time, you can spend that time studying these 4 words.